Well, I just want to welcome everybody to the first webinar of Climate Change Education. My name is Justin Smith, and I'm one of the instructors working with Dr. Marianne Krasny, who will be presenting the introductory webinar for the course. Just to give you all a quick run through on how this is going to work, Marianne will present some of the basic ideas and topics related to the course in her presentation, and throughout the presentation we'll have opportunities for some polling. So there will be a queue for you all to answer basic questions that will show up in the polling section on your right-hand section of the of your screen there. Now, it'll be up for a couple of minutes, and you'll have a couple of minutes to be able to respond, and we'll record all the responses. A couple of them are short answers, so you'll have an opportunity to give more of a description of what it is that you're thinking about in relation to the questions. Also, there will be an opportunity for discussion at the end of the webinar, and you will all have an opportunity to type in your questions. Now, one of the ways in which we can do this is you can send a chat question, but that will most likely come directly to me and nobody else will be able to see it. The other option is to type in at the Q&A panel, which you'll see on the right-hand side. That's where all the controls are. And you can type a Q&A into the chat window there, and that will be something that everybody can see. And as we move forward in this discussion process, what I'll do is I will read out the questions aloud to Marianne so that she can have a chance to respond, and if it's something that I can answer, I will also answer. With that, I want to go ahead and hand it over to Marianne, and thanks to everybody for being here.
Okay, thanks, Justin. I'm Marianne Krasny, and I'm on the faculty at Cornell University, and I'm really pleased to be giving this webinar today to all of you who signed up for the course Climate Change Education Requires Bold Ideas and Action. The course is being offered as part of EE-Capacity, which is EPA's National Environmental Education Training Program. And in addition to Cornell University and the Civic Ecology Lab, where I am, our other major partners, the North American Association for Environmental Education. So we're going to start off the webinar and the course. Basically, today what we're going to do in this introductory webinar is three things. First, we're going to go over the course guiding question and then assumptions. So you'll learn a little bit more about sort of what the course is about, what's guiding the course. Then we're going to talk more specifically about the assignments and what you can expect on a weekly basis. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about the course participants who are, we have actually 56 people signed up from the US and Canada. And it's really exciting to see all the different organizations and all the different states and provinces from where everybody is, because it's quite diverse. So, first part, course question and guiding assumptions. So basically, I spend a lot of time thinking about this question, and that is, given the scale, the immediacy, and the magnitude of climate change, how should environmental education respond? So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more today, and we will throughout the course. And I think that you'll find as I go through this presentation and the course, that the course is not actually going to give a lot of sort of curriculum materials per se on climate change. I did read the summary of your applications, and I know some people are looking for that. That isn't the focus of this course. However, if there's a demand for that, I think it will be quite easy for us to put together. There already are a number of links to existing curricula, and I'll present one of those links today. But you'll see that the focus of the course is more sort of fundamentally on thinking about how can environmental education play a role and be most effective in the climate change sort of arena. So there's four assumptions that I'm going to go over to today. One is that climate change is real and supported by science. These are kind of the assumptions of the course. But they're things that come from me, and I'm happy to have a discussion about them, and we can disagree with them. You can disagree with them also. Those of you who know me know that I really enjoy having discussions, and I'm happy for people to disagree. So the second is that we can not shy away from action, even as educators. There's a number of people who believe as environmental educators and we should not take a stand on things. And I'm putting it right out here that in light of climate change, I don't agree with that. Third is that actions at multiple scales and in multiple sectors are needed. And finally is that we don't know all the answers about how environmental education should respond to climate change. But together in this course, and I think together more broadly as an environmental education community, we're going to be coming up with some of those answers. Okay, so Justin mentioned that we're going to have a couple of polls. And I live in a blue state, New York, so it's really easy for me to say that I don't need to worry about questioning the assumption that climate change is real and it's based up by scientific fact. But I hear from a lot of people who are in other states, more red states, that this is really a problem for them. So I just wanted to get a feel for those of you who are on this call. Are climate change deniers a problem that are impacting your programs? In other words, what you feel like you're at freedom to say, whether you're in a classroom or somewhere else. So we can go ahead and take the poll. Okay.
So at this point, it's roughly 50-50.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
So I'm really in a blue state and out of touch with reality. So that's really helpful to know, because even though this isn't something that we're addressing in this course, Justin and I are really flexible. And a lot of the course is people talking to each other. And certainly, you know, we can set up separate discussion boards. I'll talk about the Pinterest boards later on, where people who have this concern, we can help facilitate a discussion on how people are addressing this. But I appreciate your feedback and knowing that this is really a concern and something that, you know, we can adapt, as I say, as we go along. Anything more to add on that, Justin?
No, I think that's about it. I mean, there's going to be, in all of these different places, obviously we will have to adapt. And I think thinking of climate change and thinking about the way we adapt our programs, I'll have to be cognizant of that, depending upon where you are. Like, I'm in Texas, and there is often pushback, but I'm also in Austin, so there is actually quite a very vibrant environmental movement here. There's a very vibrant recognition that drought and other climate-related disturbances are a big issue here, so I think it's kind of on everybody's mind. But then again, you do get the random person coming in and wanted to, you know, have some conflict. So people can shy away just to avoid the conflict.
Okay, thank you. And, you know, one of the things that might be interesting, too, is to, just since we have quite a few Canadians in the course, to find out if it's more of a concern in the U.S. in particular states and in Canada in particular provinces. So, okay, so we're going to move on. I'm going to close the poll so I can see the screen. Okay, so if we go by the assumption that climate change is real and supported by science, then one response for environmental education, getting back to my initial question, is how should environmental education respond to climate change, is that we should focus on STEM education, so science, technology, engineering, and math education. And as I said, the purpose of this course isn't really to provide you with lots of resources, curriculum resources per se. It's rather to promote a larger discussion about climate change education. But I just put this up here as one website that has a number of STEM education resources on climate change. And there's lots of others. There's also, I think we have somebody in the course from the New England Aquarium. And New England Aquarium has been a leader on a number of National Science Foundation grants on climate change science education. So there'll be lots of opportunities for us to at least post resources if that's something that people are interested in. Okay, so STEM education is obviously really, really important that we know the science and we understand the importance. But the issue for STEM education, if we're thinking about climate change as a major issue that we need to address, is that learning about climate change does not necessarily lead to action about climate change. And I have here 4 references that are relevant to this point about knowledge doesn't equal action. And also, any of these citations like Dickinson or Kayan, at the last or second to last slide in this presentation, I give the full reference. And if you have any troubles accessing because they're not openly available to you, let me know, and we can help you access them if they're not already published on the course site. So the first reference I wanted to mention is about terror management theory, and the article is open access. It's by my colleague Janice Dickinson at the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology. And what terror management theory says is that if we give people a lot of information that's kind of threatening or that might engender fear in people about future scenarios about climate change, they're going to feel threatened, insecure, and so they're going to do things to make themselves feel less threatened or more invulnerable, less vulnerable. And so, for example, if I feel like, you know, a lot of people are telling me that climate change is going to have this sort of awful future for me and I'm scared about my future, then what I'm going to do to make myself feel less vulnerable is I might do something actually counter to what we would want. Like I might want to go and buy a big truck so that I feel less vulnerable. And that's what terror management theory is, and she does a good job of explaining it in the article. The second one is from Daniel Kayan at Yale, and this is about social and political identity trumping our knowledge. So basically what this work shows, this body of work, is that one's social and political identity better predicts what one does about climate change than how much one knows about climate change. So for example, Justin's in a red state, he's in Texas. He might know a lot about climate change, maybe more than I do being in a blue state, but his social identity might be with the conservative wing of the Republican Party, let's say, or with a conservative Christian group. And he's more likely, even though he knows more about climate change than I do, to not want to do any action to mitigate climate change because his group identity does not sort of facilitate or does not encourage him to take action. Whereas I know less about climate change, but my identity is liberal-leaning Democrat. I'm more likely to take action. So that's the second sort of issue about knowledge doesn't lead to action. Now the third comes from the work of John Fraser, who is actually, he's a researcher, but he's also the evaluator for EE Capacity. He runs an organization called newknowledge.org in New York City. And he has written about the emotional impacts of knowing about troubling scenarios, particularly related to the environment. So he's done research on environmental educators and how we as environmental educators, we're often, on a daily basis really, we're exposed to sort of things that aren't very happy that might make us feel sad, like environments being degraded. And that this can lead to people actually feeling sad and depression. And so we need to be really careful about presenting knowledge that's very negative in particular because of the potential emotional impacts. Now, he's worked with environmental educators, but I would assume that this would be even more of a concern with some of the young people or other audiences that we're working with. And then lastly, I wanted to mention this reference, Downey et al., which was actually came out of an online professional learning community that was conducted by Karen Holweg with EE Capacity. And this publication, which again you can access, you can go to the slide with the references at the end, and it talks about sort of learning theories and psychology and how they apply to climate change education and communication, and comes up with some of the same sort of points about knowledge doesn't lead to action that I've talked about here. Okay. So we know that knowledge alone is ineffective in garnering action. So then the question, at least for me, becomes, is it unethical to convey science knowledge alone? And not just because it might impact, say, vulnerable audiences, for example, youth, and make them feel sad, but also if we think that this is a huge problem that we need to address, then I think you could ask, is it ethical just to sort of convey knowledge? I mean, some people have equated the climate change movement to the civil rights movement, and one could ask oneself, if we were sort of teaching at the time of the civil rights movement, say 50 years ago, would we have wanted just to present some kind of factual information rather than take a stance given the human rights issues that were involved at the time? And I think there's some parallels to climate change. So here's the cool thing, is that environmental education is so much broader than STEM education. It incorporates STEM education, but it incorporates other things that I think puts environmental education in a really key and very good position to address climate change. So in addition to knowledge or content or STEM, environmental education has a long tradition of also incorporating citizenship, how do people get involved in the civic life of their community or more broadly in voting, as well as action. So these are really key to how we can basically not shy away from action even as educators. I think environmental education allows that. And along the same lines, this is from an article actually about climate change communication. But the author has 3 types of information that she or he, I couldn't tell from the name, feels like should be communicated. And I think even though the article is about communication, it applies to education also. So the 3 types of information are systems information like ecosystem processes, which I would equate to STEM education, action-related information, what can be done, and then importantly, effectiveness. So which actions will have the greatest impacts or benefits. And I'm going to read you this quote, and then we're going to do another poll about whether you agree with it or not. So you can read along and pay attention. So Milford says that climate change communication has so far focused on system knowledge. That is, the science of climate and public understanding of the causes and consequences of the changing climate. So here's what's important. She says that perhaps it's now time to shift the focus of climate change communication from system knowledge to action-related and effectiveness knowledge, by communicating the mitigation actions most effective in tackling the pressing issues. Thus, it is now more important that the public is informed about the actions that will advance the greatest environmental benefits than knowing the evidence from climate science. So we're going to do another poll, and basically, Justin's going to tell us what percentage of us agree and what percentage of us disagree with this statement.
It is opened and people are responding.
Great.
So far, it looks like everybody agrees.
Interesting. Huh. So we have more agreement on this than we did on the first one about that. Yeah, that's great. So do we wait like for, oh, you have it up for 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, but I've gone ahead and ended it because everybody already responded.
Okay. Was there any disagreement?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Well, we're all on board on that one then. Thank you. And certainly we can, you know, if you have some questions or other ideas about any of this, you can put them up. Justin, I'm sorry, should they put them up on the QA or chat if they have some thoughts they want to share as we go along?
Either or is fine. If they send the chat, I will get it and I can go ahead and chime in as they send the questions in. Okay.
Okay, great. All right. So we're going on to assumption 3. Actions at multiple scales and in multiple sectors are needed. So I'm going to cover a few people who have written about this. One is Elinor Ostrom. She won the Nobel Prize for economics, but she wrote a lot about resources for environmental economics over many years. Unfortunately, she passed away a couple years ago. But I think what she wrote has a lot of relevance for environmental education, even though it's in the realm of economics and political science. So in an article that she wrote in 2009, she makes the argument that the problem of climate change won't be solved by waiting for global agreements. Now, it's interesting because in the last, 6 months, you know, Obama has been active in climate change agreements with the Chinese, and there's been a lot more than there was, obviously, in 2009 when she was writing this. So she refers to some of the problems with the Kyoto Protocol and some of the previous agreements. If she were alive today, I think she would probably still make the case that we shouldn't wait, but I think maybe there is more hope with global agreements. But it's always, I think, what she's advocating for, that the more community-based action I think there's always an interaction between that and what happens at the larger national and even global scale. And certainly that's something we could talk about if people are interested in that. But anyway, she also says that building trust and more broadly social capital, and she defines social capital as not only trust but also social connections, or how connected people are with each other, as well as that they share common norms and have working institutions like government and nonprofits. So building trust and more broadly social capital is critical to people acting for the greater public good. So she considers climate change and acting on climate change basically as a collective action problem, and she writes a lot about in which cases or what factors need to be present for people to act for the greater good rather than solely in their self-interest. So some of the other factors that she's found over many years of her research that are likely to be present when people take collective action are things like resources, and here we've made natural resources, can be monitored, and then the results can be shared. So people have a way to keep track of the resources and what's happening with them. Also, the outcomes of people changing their behaviors or changing policies can be monitored, and the results can be shared. So we know sort of who's doing what and what impact that's having. Thirdly, the rate of change in our resources, or the resources that, say, a community is focusing on, she applies this to climate change in the particular article that's quoted at the back, but she worked a lot on things like fisheries resources or forest resources, more traditional natural resources. So the rate of change in resources and in demographics is moderate. I think that one's a little problematic for climate change, in that the rate of change seems to be increasing rapidly. And then finally, communities maintain communication and strong social ties. So getting back to sort of this sharing information, people are communicating with each other, but there's also this social capital. People trust each other and they have social connections. So now we have an open-ended poll. I'm not sure if it's called a poll, but a response anyways. And my question for you is, how can Ostrom's principles be incorporated into environmental education? So for example, that people need to trust each other before they will act in the collective or for the collective good, or that we need to have information about the outcomes of any change in behaviors or policies in order for people to act collectively.
I'm going to go ahead and open it now.
We'll give some people some time.
Yeah, it'll take a moment for people to fill that out. I just wanted to note that it's interesting, Ostrom's work and the relation to the role of social identity and the connection in terms of those social connections in terms of being kind of the mechanism or means to promote action, right? And I think they're very much related, and there's a definite overlap there. That's so one of the questions then becomes how do you create those social relations that help shape identity in a way that is conducive to action in light of knowledge, right?
Yeah, that sounds like something we could explore, and I always like to sort of have diagrams of what the proposed relationships are.
Sure.
So we'll give you an assignment, Justin. Maybe you can make a diagram and post it.
Yeah, maybe a diagram would be a good, well, at least a good exercise. One of the things I was thinking about in terms of some of the work that we did last summer was the role that action plays in terms of shaping thinking, right? And when you engage in a volunteer program or some kind of educational opportunity that really promotes social interaction, there's those opportunities for formation of new relationships that can basically create a new structure around how you create identity, or at least that kind of that groundwork, right? Where you're associating with different types of people, sharing different types of ideas related to this particular project or work that you're doing. And I think environmental education does offer that opportunity to get diverse groups of people together around a common theme, right? But that's that opportunity to start shaping that identity, shaping those, and by through those relationships, through that social capital development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, those are great points.
So I'll read one response, as someone said as a chat. This is from Melissa Mullins. Her response was, I don't have a simple answer to this. I don't know that when it comes to trust, surveys show that despite ClimateGate and whatever the public trusts scientists the most for information on climate change. So maybe engaging more scientists in effective communication and environmental education is a part of the picture. And that's exactly what actually Dan Kahan would say, as that his whole work is all about the science of science communication. It's great point.
So I just want to go over a few other people who have written about actions related to climate change. And one of the people who I think is really interesting is Kaya Chatterjee. If you get a chance to hear her speak, she's a great speaker. And she wrote a book called The Zero Footprint Baby, I think is what it's called. And I know that those of you who are part of the E-Capacity Climate Change Fellows got the opportunity to hear, as I did. And one of the things she really emphasized was the importance of visible action. So an action that's not so visible would be, say, saving water when I'm brushing my teeth, as opposed to a visible action, which would be if I put a solar panel on my roof. And the whole idea is that if you have visible actions, there's sort of a peer pressure or a social norm is created and people want to copy you. And this is kind of funny because this is actually happening in my neighborhood right now. Like two of my neighbors are now installing solar panels, which is something I've been thinking about and wanting to do for years. But now that they're doing it, I'm going to be so much more likely to do it because I feel maybe a little embarrassed that I haven't done it. But also it's kind of the norm, it's acceptable. I won't be, sort of sticking out or anything. And I can learn from them about their experiences and which firms they worked with. So anyway, her point is about visible actions and how visible actions can spur other people to action. All right, so then I wanted to talk about a really interesting article. It was an op-ed or an opinion editorial that was in the New York Times this last week. And it was by a guy named Robert Shiller, and it's called How Idealism Expressed in Concrete Steps Can Fight Climate Change. And one of the things that Shiller covered is this thing called the Copenhagen Theory of Change, which comes from a book called Climate Shock. I don't know if I can hold it in front of my thing there, Climate Shock. Yeah, maybe you guys can see it. It's by Wagner and Weitzman. It just came out in 2015. We just got it in our library at Cornell today, so I just got it out. It looks like a great book. It's, I think they're economists, but it's written really in a very friendly style about perspectives on climate change, action, and what works. And I'm looking at the number of pages, but it's actually only about 150 pages, so it looks like and they're small, it looks like a really easy read. Anyway, so the Copenhagen Theory of Change. What that's about is that often larger scale action starts with grassroots individual actions that then become the norm. And the example they give is Copenhagen and bike riding. So when we had the oil or the gas crisis in the 1970s, at that time, Copenhagen was a lot of European and American cities, which was almost everybody was commuting by car. But with the gas shortages, people started commuting by bike. And today, 50% of the commutes to work in Copenhagen are by bike. I know Copenhagen's flat, but it's also pretty cold and wet much of the year. So I think the point is that, and it kind of overlaps a little bit with what Kaya Chatterjee is saying about visible actions too, is that the individual actions are important and they can scale up, especially when you have a policy environment, as I assume you might in a city like Copenhagen, where the government is then also facilitating these actions, for example, by creating bike lanes in this case. And another thing that Shiller covers in this op-ed in the New York Times is this idea of climate clubs. So climate clubs would be if there's a group of countries that get together and they form a regional climate coalition. And then they set up guidelines from the way they're going to conduct business and CO2 footprint and so forth. And then what they do is they set up sanctions, or essentially they have less trade or don't import from those countries that don't follow their guidelines. So it's another idea. And now we have our last response or interactive item, and that is, do you think that this idea of climate clubs is something that we could adapt for school or other settings like informal science education or informal environmental education settings? So just as an example, and this might not be a good one, but just one I came up with. So one might have a climate club in a school. You might have, say, 3 or 4 classrooms, but they decide they're going to have certain guidelines about behavior, about riding bikes to school or recycling or whatever. And then they form this climate club, and then there's somehow a pressure on the other, say, classrooms to join the club, either a negative or a negative pressure, you know, we won't do certain things with you, or maybe we will do certain things with you if you join or whatever. So that's just an idea. And now, Justin, if you want to set up a response item, or discussion item again, with this last one.
Yeah, and everybody will have an opportunity. This is also a short answer, so it's not an easy yes/no, but it is now open. I also wanted to note that some of this stuff on Chatterjee, the idea of making visible changes that people can see in terms of creating new social norms, is directly related to, say, the work of Everett Rogers and the diffusion adoption. And wow. And it's one of the things that Rogers talks about in the research on the diffusion adoption discusses the way in which like leaders or thought leaders within a social network, when they adopt, you know, a new practice, a new technology, those are the ones that have the most power in terms of promoting the diffusion of some kind of innovation or new product. And it's those early adopters, right, that and based upon their position within a social network, they're able to then be kind of help generate almost this kind of viral effect, if you will. But the other part of that to note is that what we've seen within diffusion adoption research is there's always this S-shaped curve, right, where as it begins to diffuse out into society, there's this rapid uptake, an exponential growth in terms of the adoption of a new type of behavior, a new technology. But then it begins to hit a ceiling, and then it levels out. And it seems that that's where government policy and individual action come together to create, you know, to fill in that gap, right? Where, like, government policy is only going to be able to do so much, whereas also the individual action will only be able to do so much. It's the kind of the synergy between the two that is required to really make those large-scale transformations.
Thank you. And certainly if people are interested in any of the other resources that Justin mentions, we can post them too.
Yeah, it looks like the poll box is not working for everybody.
Okay. Huh.
I think it's like Julie, said that hers is not working. But just to give her thought, if that's all right, is that the school or other community could use an app or other e-tool to create a game around visible or not climate-friendly actions, with members competing to make the most changes, including technical ENERGY STAR appliance use, behavioral like biking more, social, inviting others to join the game. That's a great idea, actually. Is it something that everybody could be a part of and monitor everybody? But it's also a game that you play to make it fun.
Yeah, this is great. Even though she had problems, I hope that can be shared when we get that thought can be shared when we get the sort of the compilation of everybody's thoughts.
Yeah.
And when I move along a little bit, you'll see that we've already made progress towards the course assignment just by having these discussions.
Yes.
So let me see how we're doing for time. We got 20 minutes. I think maybe I should keep going.
Yeah, I mean, we've got, let's see, we've got a few responses. But yeah, you can go ahead and keep going. The poll will be open for another minute, so if people want to go ahead and submit their answers. They can also You can also submit through the chat as well. That'll be sufficient, and then I can post answers without names later on today.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is mitigation versus adaptation and the implications for environmental education. Because I think when we think about actions, we can think about actions that mitigate climate change and actions that adapt to climate change and actions that do both. So adaptation, I think, raises a lot of questions for environmental education, and here's some that it raises for me. First is adaptation and abandonment of our traditional environmental education values. In other words, for over 100 years, environmental education has been about reducing our impact on the environment. So essentially, actions that are consistent with mitigation. So if we decide now that we instead are going to focus on adaptation, are we sort of giving up and saying, well, it's going to happen, so we just need to adapt? So that's one question I have about mitigation versus adaptation. The second is that not all adaptation actions are consistent with environmental education, or consistent, what we might say, with environmental values. So, for example, if we have large infrastructure projects that are there to prevent sea rise, or even smaller projects that people are just doing because they're desperate in light of flooding, not all of these are going to benefit the environment in addition to helping people adapt to the flooding or other disturbances that they're experiencing. And then finally, adaptation is human-centric. I think this is kind of obvious, but it seems to not be very much discussed when we read about adaptation. So humans are very adaptable animals, and I think, you know, we're going to adapt one way or the other, at least a portion of the human population, but other animals and plants obviously may not be able to adapt in the same ways. So if we think about adaptation, I think it's really important in environmental education to also think about actions that are consistent with mitigation or environmental values. And if you read the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report from last year, 2014, it has several chapters on adaptation, and it talks about different categories of adaptation. And within those categories, there's different things you can do, and some of them might be more environmentally consistent or consistent with environmental values, and some of them less so. So, for example, under the category physical structural adaptations, there's a subcategory called ecosystem-based. So those wouldn't be things like massive concrete seawalls, but instead it would be things like putting, you know, old Christmas trees on a beach to try and rebuild sand dunes, or a lot of the oyster restoration efforts in the artificial oyster reefs. They're not only helping to protect shoreline and helping maybe to build up shorelines, but also they will facilitate the growth or reintroduction of oysters, for example, into the New York City harbor. So that's an example of an ecosystem-based or several ecosystem-based adaptations. They also talk about social adaptations, and I think ones that would be consistent with the type of work we do are community-based education. So again, this sort of smaller scale, grassroots education as an approach to climate adaptation. And then they talk about institutional, or say the way that governments or the nonprofit or business sector might change. And there is a subcategory under there about talking about engagement and people engaged in discussions in civic life or in the institutions of the communities where they live. So the IPCC also has this statement that I think is very relevant to environmental education. It says that the capacity to adapt is dynamic, and it's influenced by economic and natural resources, by social networks, entitlements, institutions and governance, human resources, and technology. And again, I think environmental education is in a great position because we can contribute to many of these factors that are important in our ability to adapt. And hopefully we can contribute in a way that's consistent with environmental values. So we all know that environmental education contributes to human resources. We've talked some about trust and social connections. I think environmental education, also maybe particular hands-on environmental education that brings people together in joint projects, also has the potential to contribute to social capital. Environmental education is an important part of and contributor to natural resources management. And then I didn't really mention the term polycentric governance, but basically this idea also comes from Elinor Ostrom and her colleagues. And it's the idea that governance is not just, formal government like the U.S. federal government or even the UN or municipal or state government. That governance really includes all the NGOs, the nonprofits, even the private enterprise and the community organizations. And I think including organizations that do environmental ed, whether they be, say, a wildlife reserve or a nature center or a community center. And I think we, as environmental educators working at these organizations, and also universities, can be sort of part of larger polycentric governance structures that are influencing policy and resource management in our communities. Okay, so just sort of as a summarizing some of the ways that environmental education can contribute to this climate change sort of extreme need for solutions and ways to address the problem. That we can contribute knowledge. We have a strong history of science or STEM education. We have a strong tradition of engaging young people and adults in the civic life of their community. And I think we can also add to that, maybe this is being done, but I'm not so aware of it, of some of the work, say, of Elinor Ostrom on what kinds of factors are present when citizens do engage in their community. And then action is that I think we can think very seriously about the most effective actions, whether they're individual or collective and visible actions. Okay, so now I'm going to go to part B, and that's what you can expect in the course. And I should say these last two sections are a bit shorter than the first two, so we will finish on time. Let me see what time it is. 3:47. Okay, sorry about that. So one of the things that we're doing in this course is that we're using a Pinterest site for the course. I'm not sure how many of you have been on it already. This is a new experiment for us in our online courses. The reason we're using Pinterest is because we want to have a place, an online repository that's really easy to get to, where we can post, say, a bunch of articles. You'll see climate change in the news, or we can post infographics or videos. And most important for this course is on the left, we can also post op-eds or opinion editorials from the New York Times, Washington Post, and lots of other sources that are about climate change action and justice. And we've already started doing that. Some of you from the course, and Nandi Premlal has posted a bunch of infographics and maybe some other things too to some of our other boards, which we really appreciate and hope you will all be posting. And if any of you are like me and don't use Pinterest, or at least hadn't, I hadn't until about a month ago, I found that it was very, very easy to use. Justin helped me, and he's always willing to help people. I hope I can say that for you, Justin. So if you're a little technophobic like me, I think you'll find Pinterest really quite simple and very friendly. So in addition to the speakers in the course, and you've seen the syllabus, we'll have the Pinterest site. And our assignment for the course will be for you to write an op-ed, and you can write it with another person in the course if you like. It can be co-authored by one or more people. And your op-ed, you're going to have to take a stand and then defend it with evidence on climate change, what role for environmental education. So for example, if you think that environmental education should stick to STEM education, or that should be the most important thing it does, you can write an op-ed about that and defend your point of view. Given that we have a lot of people who are dealing with climate change deniers, it'll be very interesting to think about maybe some op-eds that address that issue, and what can environmental education, for example, how can we address the issue of climate change deniers, given what we know about social identity and trust and a lot of other things. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new board on Pinterest, and that will be your op-eds about environmental education and climate change or climate action and justice. And I'm really, really excited to see these op-eds. I also wanted to mention that probably the reason that I wanted to do op-eds for this course, and Justin agreed with me, is that I'm actually part of what's called the Public Voices Op-Ed Fellowship, which is a fellowship for, they work with many groups, but in particular, I'm in one for university faculty. And the whole idea of the fellowship is to increase the diversity of voices that are in the media. And so through this fellowship, I'm actually learning to write op-eds, and I know what the basic structure is, which I'm going to share with you in a later webinar. And I'm actually, through the fellowship, I've become a blogger for the Huffington Post, and I also blog for the Nature Cities, and I'm going to have a blog on the PBS NOVA education site coming up in April. So not all my blogs right now are op-eds, because some of them are just sort of fun pieces, but they don't really take a stance. But we will focus in particular on op-eds, which means taking a stance and supporting it by evidence, and then usually they end with a call for action. So we'll learn a little bit more about that in the course. All right, and then I just wanted to close by saying, it's really, really sincerely a privilege to work with all of you through e-capacity in this course in particular. Some of you I know this afternoon were already posting on our Facebook site, introducing yourselves, and you're doing some really, really interesting and inspiring work. And so I just sort of grabbed a few logos of some of the participants in the course. I mentioned New England Aquarium as the participant. They're in Boston. We have Faith in Place, a faith-based group in Chicago that does a lot of work with community gardens and monarch migration, some very community-engaged environmental work. We have Earth Force from the middle of the country, from Colorado. And then it was really interesting to look at all the coastal groups that are represented, maybe because of coastal areas in particular, I think, see the threat to climate change, from climate change. So we have the Island Institute from Maine, and then we go all the way over to the other side of the continent with the Sierra Club from British Columbia. And interestingly, we have a group from Newfoundland, so we're coming back over to this side, the east side of the North America, but way up north. Oceans Learning Partnership, and then we can go down to Florida where we have the Florida Gulf Coast University. So these are just a few of we have 56 enrollees, but a couple of you are from the same organization. So we probably have about 54, 53 organizations represented, and so much of the course is going to be learning from each other and sharing with each other. So there's a kind of responsibility on you also as participants in the course to share what you know and your experiences, and we all look forward to learning about that. Okay, so I mentioned these are the references of the articles or books or reports that I used in this introductory webinar, and I think that's it. Questions, comments, and then the last slide is I just wanted to thank our funders, the Environmental Protection Agency. So how are we doing for time? We got
7 minutes.
7 minutes for question answer.
And we already have a statement question that's, I think, relevant to the issue of dealing with deniers. And this is actually really relevant, I think, for those people writing op-eds as well. So Kim mentioned that she completely agrees with the action statement. However, I live in Florida where the DEP is not allowed to use the phrase climate change, and there are many deniers in the general populace. How to deal with this discrepancy?
Right.
So if you can't talk about it, then
you know, knowing that there's that many deniers, and I'm actually, you know, I have seen some recent media on, in fact, it's posted on our Pinterest site, I think under news, about the articles that came out recently in the national media about, you know, not the people working for the DEP in Florida not being able to use the term climate change. I'll be honest, I don't know the answer, but I'm really inspired to start sort of searching about how people in the red states or where this is a real issue are dealing with it. And I think we'll need some guidance from you, and also I'm sure Justin has some really good ideas about this of, for example, do we want to set up maybe a separate Pinterest board or just way to share resources, because I'm sure obviously there's other people that have thought about this, and I'm sure some of you are thinking about ways to address this. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer now, but I can say that we're committed to working with you to explore some of the answers to this issue.
Let's see. Thanks, Marianne. Yeah, it'll be interesting how we navigate this process.
Certainly, if in the meantime any of you have resources on climate deniers and how to deal with it, You could share them on Facebook, or if you would rather share them in some other way, then just let Justin and me know. And, you know, as I said, we can set up a separate Pinterest board to post them, or some other way that you think is best. We could also use Google Docs. I actually find Pinterest easier to use than Google Docs.
Yeah. Google Docs could be a good way to maybe do the staging. And also I wanted to mention real quick, there's also the opportunity to do multimedia op-eds as well. And that's mentioned in the syllabus and on the course site. But if you have videos or other kinds of media, audio clips that you want to include in your op-ed as evidence to support your position, then that's always an exciting thing to do. So, especially since these are all going to be online and we can take advantage of that.
And that could be really creative. I'm going to ask my mentors for my Public Voices Fellowship if they have any thoughts about how one does that.
I just wanted to go over real quick a couple of things that people had mentioned about the idea around the climate clubs. A couple people had mentioned that it was a great idea. Kim had noted that a student at the college I am at wants to have a competition between the dorms related to energy use, with the groups using least energy winning an incentive. I also think climate clubs in general can help create new social norms. And I think that is somewhat, that sentiment is also related to what Janora says. This model would be great to adopt in the school district. In DC, there is an online tool that monitors energy usage in all public buildings, including schools. Perhaps classes within a school can work together to decrease energy consumption and maybe other measurable things like waste. Having classes within the school work together and also promote school spirit and strengthening social ties, which Ostrom also talks about. So these are all great ideas, I think, and it seems like for the most part, people are pretty interested in that model. Maybe that's something else that people can explore on the Facebook group, or if they come across other examples, you can post them to the Pinterest sites. If you find any examples in the news and ways in which groups have implemented some of these things. If you've got something on your campus that's been published in one of the college newspaper or on a website, you can also post that on the Pinterest sites as well. And finally, just to let you all know, there is the opportunity when you post to Pinterest, you can also link that to your Facebook, and so you can cross-post so that everybody can see them in both places simultaneously.
So are people going to need any instructions on Pinterest, or is that, I can't remember if we've given those instructions.
There are some instructions that were provided in the introductory email, but if you would like more information, I can put together a short little video that will let people be able to go through some of the steps. I think if you're using Chrome, there's an extension that you can download that will make it a lot easier for you to just pin whatever images and videos that pop up that you're searching. It's super easy, and you can sync it to your Pinterest account. And I also provided everybody the link with the intro email as well. But I think we're out of time, and if anybody has any other questions or things to mention, you can either you can post them on the Facebook site, and we will be sure to respond today and throughout the week. And yeah, thanks for everybody for attending. Thanks, Marianne.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody.